we did one support tour at this point with Jimmy Eat World in the interim, like one of those years, and that's about the only touring that we had done. So like this is the thing, like you don't do, like once you start getting momentum, you don't just suddenly like disappear for like 2 or 3 years. I mean, this is not the right thing to do. But we had, and like time kind of slipped by, and so eventually we ended up getting let go from Warner Brothers before we really even put the record out.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, I'm really trying to get Gabe support on this thing, so if you are friends with him or have a connection to him, just bombard him with requests for him to be on the show, and that might help me along. Formed in 1990, Sensefield were one of the several contemporary bands to popularize the post-hardcore or emo subgenre. The band was initially signed to Revelation Records, releasing 3 albums and later signing with Warner Brothers in 96. However, problems within the label caused the band to sit in limbo for 5 years as the label restaffed multiple times. The band was eventually released from their contract, and Sensefield won the right to re-record the album they had originally written for Warner Brothers Records. Later, they broke up in 2004, but reunited for Revelation Records' 25-year anniversary show and played again for John Bunch's tribute concert in 2016. To this day, I rock out to Overstand and Outlive the Man on a weekly basis because those are fucking bangers. So I'm guessing if you're listening to this interview, you've heard those songs, but if you have no idea who Sensefield is, go just pull up Building in Spotify and listen to those 2 songs, and you'll be sold. I was lucky enough to get guitarist Chris Evenson on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. Finding their scene, the Revelation van, playing shows with harder sounding bands, writing Building, getting mixed by Andy Wallace, Overstand's guitar riff, signing to Warner Brothers, what Save Yourself did to the band, John joining Further Seems Forever, playing Revelation 25, how they got the singers for the John Bunch tribute concert, and a ton more. This week's sponsor is Mint 400 Records. Mint 400 Records is an indie record label from New Jersey with bands across the United States, Canada, and Europe. The label features everything from indie rock and folk to post-punk and soul. Over 400 exciting releases. You can find Mint 400 Records releases streaming at Spotify, Pandora, Tidal, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, and more, or at all MP3 outlets worldwide. Visit mint400records.com for links and more info. Here's a clip from the artist Tom Barrett's song Together, Together, Together from the 5 Songs EP. Thank you, Mint 400 Records, for always loving the podcast and sponsoring this. If you, too, would like to sponsor the podcast, just email thiswasthescene@gmail.com. Lastly, if you need an explainer animation for your company, check out my company, drive80.com, drive80.com, and you can go there and you can check out some samples, and you can email me, and we can get a project going. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. Yeah, so just like to kind of start off, and I know you've probably answered this question a fucking 1,000 times, and I'm really going to try to find questions that you haven't, because I've seen you've been interviewed plenty of times throughout the years. So in the beginning, like, what got you personally into, like, the scene? Was it just you going to shows, or were you in a band and the band got you into the scene?
Well, I mean, all of myself and all the guys in the band were all into punk rock kind of before pre-90s, 80s era punk here in Los Angeles. You know, we were all in bands, I guess, nothing big. You know, we all had little local bands that either maybe played a show here or there, or some parties, stuff like that. So that's kind of was the common thread. We're all from the general kind of Southern California area, but kind of different parts. So we were kind of a part of the punk scene. I don't know what we're calling the scene here, but like that, I guess I sort of know what you're calling the scene, but I don't know what the term is anymore.
Scene, this would be more of like this podcast was started talking about the late 90s Jersey punk scene. So through that, it was very like local punk bands, but it expanded to the bands that influenced us. So, like I said, it would be like the beginning would be Fat Records bands and Epitaph bands, but then the outer shell would be people would start listening to post-hardcore and things like that, which led to Revelation and like Crank Records and things. So that's kind of the bubble that I'm talking about for a scene.
Well, that scene definitely came about just from us kind of getting out there and starting to tour. Sensefield started touring in the early 90s, maybe 93, I think, 94 maybe, I can't remember anymore, around there. And that kind of introduced us to kind of that group of bands because we were a little, before that, we were kind of in this kind of netherworld of punk had died, and there was sort of like a vacuum of, there wasn't any like clearly defined kind of areas we could go with the kind of music we did, and so we kind of existed in our little weird Sensefield bubble that was sort of cut off from anything else going on. We just kind of existed in this kind of like on our own little island for a while, like in the early 90s when we started writing and kind of coming up with our sound, which was sort of like the blend of like kind of the ends of hardcore and punk, and then with kind of newer influences like indie rock stuff and alternative music like the Pixies and things like that. And we kind of started blending those two things together. Anyways, we kind of did that in isolation for a while. It wasn't until we hooked up with Revelation Records that we kind of got injected back into any kind of like a existing scene, you know what I mean? Which was an odd fit at first, Revelation, because I knew Revelation from the 80s and stuff, and it was like all East Coast hardcore. We weren't like an easy fit for that because we were doing something much more mellow than that was at the time. But they were big supporters and they liked what we were doing, and I don't know, we really liked Jordan Cooper over at Revelation, and so that's how that all started.
I feel like your sound, because I'm born in '79, so I grew up in the '80s, but I really start gravitating towards music in the '90s, and so in the early '90s, there's Nirvana, and then there's like the Real World comes out, and there's this alternative shit that's going on, and I feel like a lot of stuff in your guys' sound feels like it pulls from that, but then you create your own thing. So it's like, but I could see where eventually you guys blended into the scene that I'm talking about, but still, like you said, kind of lived in your own bubble. But like I feel like in the initial development of your sound, were you guys pulling from, like, was it just circumstance that you guys had that sound coming out that was like that early 90s grunge thing? Or like, were you like, meaning with MTV and all that shit being around you, were you pulling from that, or are you finding more obscure things to pull from?
Well, it's probably a little different because Rodney Sellers and myself were the two main songwriters, and we had definitely different influences. I was still probably pulling more from, I was really into like DC hardcore, like in the 80s and stuff like that, and kind of those bands that, anything from Minor Threat through Rites of Spring and all that kind of stuff. And that was probably still like the major influence on myself, and then maybe some of the Pixies. Whereas Rodney, who was also into punk, but he liked Pink Floyd and more trippy, proggy kind of stuff. And so it was kind of a weird amalgamation of those two worlds. Like on Building, like the songs that are a little bit more, slightly more punky tend to be mine, and the ones that are more experimental or more kind of abstract tend to be his. Yeah, all that stuff was happening. Like Nirvana, all that stuff blew up at the same time, but it wasn't, I don't know that we ever really, at least not consciously, drew from that. It seemed like we were still drawing from influences that were like the same influences they had, like, early punk and the Beatles and, anything like that, anything that was like melodic, but had more, a little bit more aggressive sound.
So essentially, like, you were more on like the punk side of things with like writing songs, with John's voice being so like not harsh. Did you want that initially, or when he came in, you were just like, oh, this works?
Yeah, no, I always wanted a melodic singer, and that's why I kind of like, maybe saying I groomed him is too strong a word, but John was a friend of ours and part of like a circle of people kind of in the mid 80s, but he hadn't been in any bands, and he hadn't really sung in any bands, but he wanted to be really bad. he would sometimes like mess around at like practices for some of the other like bands I was in, and I noticed that he could sort of hold a note. We both liked kind of melodic punk stuff, like, I mean, early Scream or 7 Seconds or the bands that kind of played fast but had some melody. Rather than just like screaming or, stuff like that. I wanted somebody who could hold a note and could, sing a few different notes in a song rather than just like kind of atonal, like yelling and whatnot.
Why though? Like, why did you want that though?
Because that's what I like. That I don't, I like some straight up screaming. It depends on the music, but I mean, I also love the Beatles and stuff like that. So I like the juxtaposition of like actual definable melodies over fast or loud aggressive music. I mean, I think that's a cool combination. And so that's where I wanted to go, and that's where he wanted to go. We both liked a lot of the same bands at the time that were kind of melodic, like SNFU and other bands at the time that were playing fast but had at least a little bit of melody in the music. We both were on the same page as far as that was concerned. And so I actually, in college, I had a class on recording that I could take as an elective. In that class, the final project was to make a recording of your own, I did a recording for what was going to become Reason to Believe, which was our little hardcore band that we had before Sensefield, where I played the instruments, and then I said, hey, I brought John in to sing because I knew he wanted to, and I thought he could probably do it, and so he sang on this really rough demo that we did. So that's kind of how that partnership began.
So when you guys start off and start playing shows, what was that like? Where were you getting your gigs at?
Well, in the early days for Sensefield, we were just kind of we weren't really plugged into any scene anymore. We'd kind of strayed from the world we were kind of playing in Reason to Believe, which was, at that time, the late 80s and whatnot, it was a lot of like the positive hardcore bands, a lot of the Revelation stuff, like Instead and Gorilla Biscuits and, that whole world. We used to play with those bands, but when we did Sensefield, we figured, okay, well, this is totally different. Those people are definitely not going to like us. They're going to think we're like pussies or whatever. And, so we kind of just made a decision to just kind of try to strike out on our own and kind of not rely on that. And we did that for like, we floundered around in the early 90s, like, 91, 92, doing that, just playing odd clubs and stuff like that. And, that kind of was going nowhere fast. And we recorded like a demo CD kind of thing that we sort of self-released. And that's how it came to Jordan and Revelation's attention.
Was that the cassette, the EP, Sensefield cassette?
Well, there's a Sensefield record on Revelation that has like a Buddha on the front, and that is basically a re-release of our little demos that we recorded prior to being on Revelation. So we did like 2 CDs and CDs. I know it's funny that we did self-release CDs, not records back then, but that's what people were doing.
That's right.
That sliver of time. So that's how it kind of came to their attention, and that's after that, with that relationship, the Revelation world, we started kind of playing around again at more like, legit shows and like kind of hard. I don't know. I mean, back then, I guess there wasn't really a name for it. Now people call it post-hardcore or emo or whatever, but then it was just, I don't know, it didn't really even have a name. I guess some people called it emo, like the real early stages of that kind of whole scene.
Is that weird to you though? Like because I think like being in a scene, it gives you direction. And if you're not, you're kind of just floating around. It's hard to grasp on where you're going.
Well, it's definitely better it's better, like any band that can get plugged into an existing scene is always going to be better off because there's a built-in audience. Like trying to create your own audience out of nothing is like a ton of work. I mean, it's really difficult and it can be done, but it's hard to do. So kind of getting back into that world was definitely much better because then people automatically, started actually seeing us. And, as it turns out, a lot of those people were actually the people we should have been playing in front of that would like us because we were always kind of an oddball band. People would be like, a lot of these random shows we'd play around town, people didn't really know what to make of us. You're definitely better off in a lot of ways. I mean, it helps in so many ways. It helps to sell records. It helps to get people to your shows. It helps to get press and all those things if you can if you are attached to something. I mean, it sounds kind of lame in a way when I say it out loud, but it's
No,
kind of true.
I think it's totally true. So when you guys start off, you get on Revelation. Seems like pretty fast. Was pretty fast that you guys got on the label, right? Like 90.
Yeah, it seems like it's fast now when I think about it, but it seems like there was a long time before that happened. But I mean, in retrospect, it was probably like a year or two of us just kind of tinkering around. Because I think 94 is like, am I 94 maybe is when our first Revelation record came out, which means so we were probably only like messing around for like maybe 3 years, but probably like 2 years.
I feel like 3 would be where you feel it's getting too long, but 2 is kind of perfect. Where like, I don't know, like the third year of not being on something, you're kind of like, okay, where the hell are we going with this?
Yeah, it was a little casual at first. I mean, it was it wasn't like a full-time job, kind of full-time. It was something we still did just kind of sporadically on weekends. And once we did the thing for Revelation, then, things changed. We actually went on, well, actually, no, that's not true. We did go on our first tour prior to Revelation. We had this crazy idea that we would go on tour based on on only this little self-released CD that, we made 500 of, and probably only reached, the Southern California area. For some reason we thought, hey, yeah, well, let's go on tour with that. And, the tour was an experience, but I mean, some places were more successful than others. I don't even know how, thinking about it now, I can't believe somebody actually booked us on that tour. Nobody knew who we were.
Who would book for you guys?
Well, at that time, it was a woman named Margie, which I can't remember the name of her company, but her name was Margie, and she was our agent back then. She used to book a lot of bands like us. She was out of Salt Lake City. But it was, a very low-level tour, lots of little shows and random shit. But it was a lot of fun, but it's not like anybody was making any money.
How old were you guys at this point?
Early 20s, I guess.
So yeah, I'm just trying to think because there's such a difference. I was talking to the Blue Meanies, and they had been touring in the early 90s, and then through the late 90s, and then to the early 2000s or like mid 2000s, and I was like, you saw this transformation from, it was cassettes, then to CDs, then MP3, or vinyl and cassettes, and then CDs, and then MP3s. So it just changes across the board, and then especially like how you book, where people have call like the dialers and things like that. Did you guys ever use those? It would make the coin sound in the payphones.
Oh no, we didn't have that. We weren't cool enough to have anything like that. But yeah, I mean, the tours were just so, by today's standards, they were so, amateurish in a way, you'd get it was maps and addresses and, directions drawn on the back of flyers and things like that, in every town. It was it was more of an adventure back then. There was no GPS or anything like that, right? So, and on our first tour, we didn't have a van or anything, but on our first tour, that when we finally got on Revelation, we went on tour for that first record, we got to borrow the Revelation van, which is an infamous van that looks like, it literally looks like a child molester van. It was like the scariest thing. It was beat up, all the windows were blacked out. We actually got pulled over by the cops before we even got out of town because we looked so suspicious. And it's a really creepy looking van. And it's like, no, officer, we're just going on tour. But yeah, totally get why you pull us over in this thing. But yeah, so our first few tours were in that thing. And
actually, real quick, when you get on Revelation, there's record labels, that's like the dream. Well, it was the dream. I don't even know what it is anymore, but that would be the dream back then. If you get on a label, they're going to help you out, and you think that you're going to be able to live off the band and stuff. When you got on them, did they have a deal that made you think that you were going to be fine, or is it just kind of we're going to put this out, but we'll just give you guys CDs and you figure it out?
No, yeah, the second one. There was no. Back then, nobody thought they were going to get rich off of what they were doing. We knew that they would put the record out. There'd be some distribution. We could borrow the van to go out on tour. But that's about the extent of it. There was no tour support. There was no. The deals were also really. Bands get much better deals nowadays. there's a lot of things like 50-50 deals where the profit is split. Like that's more common. Back then it was like the band got a very, very small percentage of stuff. But yeah, they would give us CDs and records to sell on the road and print up T-shirts. And so that was something, it was nice to have that behind you, all that kind of infrastructure kind of built into it where we didn't have to do it all ourselves. And and there was definitely a benefit to being on Revelation Records. You automatically, there was a certain number of people that were going to give you a chance, maybe buy your record just because it had the star on the back cover. So that's definitely worth something.
Did you guys want to, did you have a certain vision of where you wanted to go with the band?
Well, I'm sure we did. I mean, like every band, you just want to get big doing what you do. You want everybody to come to you. You expect, we're going to put this out there, they're going to love it, and they're all going to come over to our side. You just, you just figure that's the way it's going to be. Like, you're not going to I don't know, cater to an audience. You're just going to do your own thing, and then hopefully people like it. I mean, we wanted to get, we wanted to be successful. We wanted to get big and all that stuff. But big in the way that bands were in the 90s. Today it's so different. Everybody wants to be a pop star, it seems like. I don't know, maybe I'm old and just not clued in, but that's all it seems like to me. I mean, things really changed a lot, like with pop punk and all that stuff. Like, that wasn't even an option in those days. You weren't going to get, there was Green Day and stuff, but it wasn't like there was a ton of huge pop star punk bands or indie rock bands or whatever.
So you guys are on Revelation, and then you put out, you have the EP, and then Revelation puts out that Buddha Sensefield album. It's just a mix of stuff, and you put on Killed for Less. Where did you guys start to see? Because from my perspective, Building is the album that got spread around the most. But yeah, prior to that, were you starting to feel a bit of a buzz building around you guys?
Yeah, definitely in the 95, kind of 96 time, which 96 is when Building came out. Yeah, definitely. Kind of 96 was a really busy year for us. We did the probably most touring we ever did. Yes, the year that record came out. We had actually signed to Warner Brothers in early 96. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird with records because, like I've said this before, we put out Killed for Less. The fans that we had liked that record, and when we put out Building, there was with so many bands, nobody wants to hear the new record. They just want to hear the old record. So that record kind of became, I feel like that became the popular one. Sort of after the fact,
Really?
Well, it seemed like it, and maybe we were just listening to the people that were telling us that, yeah, this new record's cool, but yeah, play this stuff off of Killed for Less.
Oh, wow.
It seemed like later that became the one that everybody gravitated towards. And that record Building was kind of a result of us having finally gotten out in the real world and started touring and playing with bands again. Because Killed for Less is the record we wrote in our parents' basement, and stuff like that, kind of just doing our thing and not really keyed into what other people were doing at the time. And Building was definitely us out there in the world, getting exposed to, what everybody was doing and playing a lot live and getting songs getting a little louder than they were on Killed for Less and maybe a little tiny bit faster, and some more of that punk rock energy kind of starting to come back into it instead of the kind of proggier side of things that was on Killed for Less and the self-release stuff.
Were there bands you were touring with that you guys were pulling from? You'd be out on the road with them and be like, oh man, we're kind of learning this from them. Let's not steal from them, but something we're doing, you'd pull from it and then introduce it into the build it, creating the record for Building.
I'm trying to think. I don't know if it's any one band. It was more with being on Revelation, we were getting booked with a lot of hardcore bands, what was kind of that 90s era hardcore. So everything was a lot more aggressive, and you start to lose a little bit of faith in some of your softer, mellow songs when you're playing at shows like that. And as the guy who put the set list together, that was me usually. I tended to leave off all the mellow songs and just put on the songs that I thought would kind of go over better in those situations. And so yeah, that's kind of what that was. And we toured with some of the other Revelation bands. We did stuff with Texas Is the Reason and we toured with Jimmy Eat World a few times, or not a few, but maybe a couple times. And, all that stuff has at least some kind of, subconscious influence on you, whether you know it or not.
I can imagine for you with Jimmy Eat World, because Jim and Tom are awesome guitar players, that you'd be looking at them. I mean, like, you guys are really good guitar players too, so I can imagine being on tour with a band like that, it's kind of making you go, oh, I gotta step something up, or like they're thinking the same thing, or you're kind of pulling from each other.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happens when you're on tour with a band. You see them every night, and with that, both those bands and those ones I mentioned were both really good. Both had really good sounds. Like, I always kind of appreciated the overall sound each band had. They had, it was like an identifiable sound. It was whatever that was, whether it was a guitar sound or a style of writing, but it was a thing that I could latch onto. And I think that stuff just kind of like seeps into your brain and kind of makes its way into whatever you're doing.
How did you guys get the split with Mineral and Jimmy Eat World? How'd that come about?
We were all on tour together. Yeah, there was a tour, like us, Jimmy Eat World, Mineral. I think there might have been. No, I think it was the three bands. We went on a little tour. I don't know. I forget who put that together, but it was kind of something we did kind of out of that tour.
Because I talked to Chris from Mineral, and I believe I asked him the same question. It was kind of, oh yeah, we'll just do this thing, and then afterwards it became. There was a couple 7-inches back then that were pretty popular, especially Splits, and that one was pretty big. Like, so when that came out, did that also give you another boost for getting in front of more people?
I don't. Honestly, I wish I could answer that. I don't know, because I didn't even know that was like something that people like gravitated towards or liked. I mean,
back then or now?
Even then or now, honestly, I didn't know that was like a single that people liked. I mean, they're all good bands, but I don't know. That's the thing about like Sensefield, is we were even like through it all, we were still sort of an oddball fit, and kind of, because so many of the bands that we're talking about are from either like the East Coast or the Midwest, and there was a handful of bands like that out here. This is pre-internet, pre-everything, so it's kind of, sometimes it's hard to remember what it was like when you didn't really know what things people were listening to, or right, because there was no way to really know it back then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you could see. I mean, the only thing you really had back then was just, I don't think bands really did this, but to be like SoundScan. I don't know if that was, I guess that was going around then. So you did, at least the label would tell you.
But if something like that, like a single like that, I don't think that would even be registered on SoundScan. Yeah, no, that used to be. I don't know. Is that not even? I guess people don't. I think people still refer to SoundScan, but I've been out of it for so long that I don't really remember anymore. But that was a thing. But indie records always had a hard time with that, because so many of the sales were sort of at non-SoundScreen, stores, and sold over mail order or at shows and whatnot.
When you guys did Building, when you were writing it, like, what was the first song that started off writing that whole record?
Well, we had a handful of new songs. Building was one of them, which is one of the ones I wrote, like at least the music. John did the lyrics and the vocals and everything. And in Overstand, which I think is the first song on the record.
Yeah, that's the first song.
And those are two that I wrote that kind of, after kind of doing some touring and stuff like that. And, it was kind of a little bit of a return to form. It was kind of, like I said, it was a little kind of harken back to the more punk hardcore kind of influences, as opposed to like the Pink Floyd side of Sensefield.
But you could hear it. You could hear that mix in there, though. Like, you can hear, like, that record, the songs just sound, I hate saying mature, but it just, you've opened up more. Like, it sounds more like bigger, but you have those effects and things that kind of bleed in with that rock sound. So but it sounds just, it expanded more on that record. I
think we had gotten a little bit better as a band, at least in our playing together, because we'd been doing it a little longer. And when we started recording that, it wasn't really, we didn't go in saying, we're going to record a record right now, and it's coming out. Like, we just kind of went in to do some recording, because that's an area that we all really enjoyed. Like, we just loved the recording process, and, working on songs and then hearing them kind of recorded for the first time. So we went in, I think we did that record in a couple different pieces from what I remember. So we went back to the studio that we had worked with when we did the Reason to Believe record years before, this little studio in El Segundo, California, and just kind of recorded what we had at the time, and then went back again and did some more. And it was like we actually kind of went back in that Killed for Less had been done on a 24 track studio, and then the building was done in a 16-track studio. So we kind of simplified a bit. Sometimes that actually works better when you kind of have less options. So we didn't really go in with any kind of preconceived notions other than we were going to record a new handful of songs. Rodney had some new songs, and we wanted to kind of hear what these sounded like. And we pulled out a few really early songs. There's a couple songs on Building that were pre-Sensefield, post-Reason to Believe, that kind of existed in this kind of period between the two bands when we were just kind of trying new things. Yeah, so I don't know. We didn't really go in with any kind of like master plan. We just kind of went with it. And then by the time it actually came out, I mean, a lot of things had happened. We had signed with Warner Brothers like in late 95, early 96. So we went back and got those tapes. That's Richie from Into Another. He kind of hooked us up with, what's his name? God, I can't even remember. Andy Wallace, who had gained much fame for having mixed the, Nevermind by Nirvana. He kind of hooked us up with him, and he just, agreed to mix the record kind of on a really reduced budget. So, we had actually we went to New York and worked with him, and he kind of mixed the whole record in like a few days, like a really quick mix job. So we were pretty psyched to have him involved because, he was a really amazing mixer. So yeah, that record kind of just it's kind of funny the way it came together because even like the mastering process, like the mastering was done for us as kind of like a favor by a label that was trying to sign us at the time, and they just mastered it for free for us. And it was such a hodgepodge kind of job, the whole thing, by the time it came out.
That's so random. It sounds like it's not when you listen to it.
Yeah, it was totally random, and it's like it wasn't recorded all at the same time. It wasn't like it just kind of ended up being what it is, and it doesn't help. I mean, it doesn't hurt that it had like nice packaging and stuff, and that Gavin Oglesby did the artwork again, and gave it a really nice look, and so. So
like the riff for Overstand, just how it starts off, like that slide, and you said you wrote the guitar part for that, the initial one. Right? Mm-hmm. So like, was that, I know, because I've played music, I used to play in a band and stuff, and so I know when there's certain songs that you can have a riff for like 10 years that'll just be sitting around, you've been dicking around, you're like, I can't put this to something, and then finally one day you figure it out and you put it to a song, and you finally get that song, and you're like, okay, good, it's done. Or sometimes you just write it, and within seconds you have the whole song. So which was that for you with that riff?
It was the second one. That just, came together in a few minutes.
Wow.
And it's one of those, because I know what you mean. There's songs I have that I belabor over for years. Like you just can't get it to work, and you have it forever. And then the other ones that are like you just kind of vomit out in like 2 seconds, and they're like, oh, okay, well there's a song.
Yeah.
And that's how that one came. That was just like just spit it out real quick. And I remember writing that one because I did one of those things like where I recorded a guitar part, and like I stuck like a mic in a cassette player, recorded a guitar part, and then played that back over speakers, and then recorded another guitar part, and then recorded, did like that kind of like really super kind of primitive multi-tracking with on a cassette to kind of work out how the way the parts went over each other and stuff like that. But that was another one. Like I had a totally different idea of how it would go, like the drumming and everything. And then, but once I brought it to the band, and Scott McPherson, our drummer at the time, had a whole nother vision for it, and it just totally became better than I had initially anticipated.
Did you fight him on it a little bit when he was doing his beat, and you're like, no, it's this? He's like, nah, man, this is the way it's got to go.
Yeah, normally there is a lot of that. Used to be a lot of that with us. Like Rodney and I could be really particular, like, no, you've got to play it this way. But for that one, no, because it just kind of came together, and it seemed logical, and it worked, and so I didn't really have a problem. I liked what he did, especially like Rodney. He's the kind of guy, he would write music, lyrics, melodies all himself, and then try to get John to sing his lyrics and his melodies and stuff like that. And there was a lot of friction between the two of them because John wanted to do his own thing, and he didn't necessarily always like what Rodney was doing and vice versa. And so, but for me, like, at least I didn't do that. I mean, I was a drummer initially before I played guitar. And so sometimes I did have ideas for the drums, and, you know, sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But usually Scott kind of just did his own thing.
But it's so fucking awesome, dude, because that song, it just starts off just so clean, and then it dips, it has these valleys where it like spikes and dips, and like that sliding of the guitar the whole time, it just catches you. It's like, it starts off and you're like, oh, what is this? And then it comes in with the singing, and then it breaks in, and then it like dips down where you got like that breakdown part. It's fucking great. I love that
Oh,
song.
thanks, man. Yeah, that was one of those ones that, like, it comes out better than your initial idea for it. Like, it took on a whole nother life. Like, I saw it as a way more subdued kind of thing. And same thing with Building too, because that one kind of became like a favorite at, you know, playing live. People always wanted to hear Building, but when I first wrote it, it was like much slower, and it was kind of a more of a dirgy My Bloody Valentine meets Devo kind of thing. And
Okay.
I know it's probably hard to imagine, but and then, you know, we just started playing it faster and faster, and then it just kind of became what it is, and for the better, not for worse. You know, sometimes you look back on the ideas you initially have and think, God, what the hell was I thinking? Like, that was a really stupid idea. But, you know, that's what being in a band is good for. You know, sometimes you get all that input from other people and get to bounce ideas off others and realize that, oh shit, what I was thinking was totally lame. Yeah, you never know.
So basically, around this time, like we talked about, like I said earlier, where this comes out, and it was kind of like where things start, you know, in essence, kind of start happening, or the band starts to work more. You see people showing up and shit like that. So then there's a gap between so it says on Wikipedia this comes out in '96, and then '97 you do that split, and then you have a couple EPs, but then the next full length is in 2001. So that's like 5 years between Building and then Tonight and Forever. So like, what happens during that period? You guys tour a lot more? Like, what was the dialogue like internally with the band and all that?
Now, this you know, this is like a cautionary tale to other bands. You know, don't do what we did. We had signed to Warner Brothers, right? We put out Building, we kind of toured on it, and then kind of once that cycle was over, and this comes to like '97, then it was like time to go and start writing songs for the first kind of proper kind of Warner Brothers record. At the time, like, the people we worked with at Warner Brothers said, you know, you have time, go in, demo songs, work on it, and that's like the last thing you want to tell us, because we'll screw around forever and just mess around writing songs and whatnot, because, you know, we had like no concept of time. So like, we rented out a little studio in El Segundo, but actually the same studio that we recorded Building in, we later kind of took over because the old owners kind of vacated it, and so we inherited that space. It became our kind of little recording studio / rehearsal space, and we kind of just went into demo mode. And before you know it, you know, like a year or two had passed, and we were just still screwing around. We hadn't toured. We kind of messed around doing that. Then it was time to actually like pick a group of songs to go and record like proper, you know, for the record. And then that process ended up taking forever. You know, we went in with the idea that we would just kind of go in and bang it out, but we, you know, the person that we chose to work with, who was a really great guy and we loved, but he kind of had a day job as like a kind of a big time mixer. He had done like the No Doubt, their first record, and like the Bush album, and he'd mixed these records, so he had some big records out at the time, and he had to split his time between doing that and working with us. So, you know, it was like we'd record 1 or 2 days, and then a week would go by, and then we'd record another day, and then 2 weeks would go by. So this process just ended up taking forever. By the time you know it, I mean, 3-4 years.
It's 2001.
Yeah, a bit. Well, so we got to the end of, so that took us all the way almost to 2000. I think we might have done it. No, we did one support tour at this point with Jimmy Eat World in the interim, like one of those years, and that's about the only touring that we had done.
Wow.
So like this is a thing like you don't do. Like, once you start getting momentum, you don't just suddenly like disappear for like 2 or 3 years. I mean, this is not the right thing to do. But we had, and like time kind of slipped by, and by that time, like Warner Brothers had undergone, I mean, I know, multiple regime changes, and so eventually we ended up getting let go from Warner Brothers before we really even put the record out. So that was like in 2000. So then we had to regroup and figure out what the hell to do. And so we decided to go and record a record on our own, which is what we did. We recorded that next record at our little studio in El Segundo. But that, it took a little bit of time. And so we did that and kind of tried to reinvent some of the songs we had recorded for the Warner Brother record, and then came up with some new material. And so anyways, yeah, so like by that time, it's like 4 years had gone by, or since kind of we stopped really doing stuff. So yeah, that was just some bad decisions, some the label drama, it was a bunch of stuff like that went on. It kind of kept us out of commission, which was a terrible idea in hindsight.
I mean, it's funny. It's like over time, a band like that becomes mythical because everyone sees them revving up and all of a sudden they stop, and especially at that time, there was really no social media or websites to really see where they were. So all you had was word of mouth or a zine maybe where someone mentions you guys. So that could kind of work in your favor when you come back around, but it sounds like when you guys came back in 2001 that didn't happen.
Well, actually, I mean, the thing is that record, the next record actually became our biggest selling record and the one we had the most success on. Yeah, because we had that song Save Yourself, which ended up getting a fair amount of radio play at the time. It was played on a number of stations around the country, and it was actually like top requested song in a lot of markets, and like in a lot of places it had done really well. So, but that's a different kind of success, right? Like the people that come out to see a band because they heard a song on the radio are much different than, the people that are part of a scene or that are just like kind of true fans, right? So it's a whole different world, and you're much better off developing a fan like a kind of more organic fan base than relying on like fly by night radio listeners. So
yeah, so it's like you guys almost became around that time. I mean, there's always those one hits like Not a Surf, Popular, and
shit. We played with Not a Surf at that time too. Oh no, actually we played with them in '96 actually during the building era. Yeah.
Yeah, they're still playing. Apparently, they're like hugely popular.
Yeah, I heard they kind of got more popular afterwards.
Because I saw on YouTube you guys have a video. You have a bunch of videos that you guys did for that album. It looks like that or the album after that. But like that song, it sounds like it would have been. It meshes with your guys' sound, but it's so slow that you could see where if that was the thing that was presented to the masses, that they're expecting that from you all the time.
Oh yeah, it was a weird thing because that's the song that a lot of people knew from the radio, and then they'd hear the rest of our set, and it was nothing like that, and so it was It was hard to capitalize on that success because it was kind of like such an anomaly, that song. That was a John Bunch song that he wrote like on acoustic guitar, but that's the one that ended up working. I mean, sometimes it's stuff you want people to like isn't what they end up liking. But I mean, it was a good song. We're proud of it, but totally didn't kind of fit necessarily with kind of the rest of it. I mean, in a way it did, like you said, but it wasn't like we made a career doing stuff like that.
Well, I mean, that album in general is a lot slower. A lot of the more songs are slow and just very spacey and open.
Yeah. That's the thing is, I mean, we have a tendency to get bored like really quick. It's hard to just keep doing the same kind of thing over and over again. Especially me and Rodney, like we always like to be kind of screwing around with different sounds and stuff, because our background, our influences go back further than our punk rock days, we both, like new wave and stuff like that, and 60s music and whatnot, and so it's not just a purely kind of hardcore punk rock background. So I don't know, that's where a lot of that stuff comes into play. And again, we just kind of do what we want, and you just hope people are into it, but it's not always like the strategic move to make. I mean, we weren't smart in that way as a band. We didn't think of ourselves as a business. We didn't think of ourselves as like, we didn't stop and kind of, I don't know. I feel like a lot of bands are a lot smarter than we were, that are like much more like, okay, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and people are going to dig it. And I'm not saying it's like contrived or formulaic, but I don't know. We were just too into what we wanted to do and didn't really take into consideration whether or not that would go over or not.
Is it like kind of weird later on where you guys are doing like you did the Revelation 25 year and then obviously after that you guys did like the tribute for John, which obviously would get a lot of people to go to it. But when you guys would get back together, was it weird that there was such a excitement about you guys playing, or because it sounds like because it's like if you look back at the whole history of it, you're kind of figuring out where you belong, and then you know, building comes out and it's doing well, but then you take like this giant pause to write the album and you come out with a new record and like you're trying to find your footing and it never really happens. And then years later, people were like, "Fuck yeah!" And you're like, "What the hell? Is it just weird to
Yeah,
you?"
it is weird because it seems like sometimes it's a matter of people. I don't mean this to sound like conceited, but sometimes it's about people catching up to where you were.
Yeah, totally.
And sometimes I feel like we were maybe a step or two ahead of kind of where some of those people might go. And maybe it's just because we're older, but I think it's often the case. You know, I mean, there's like I was into punk rock in high school, like in the early '80s and stuff, right? There at my high school, there was probably 4 people into punk. If you go by what you see online, like on social media, you would think that every guy was into punk rock back in those days. Like everybody now claims it, right? Or is into it because now they've kind of caught up to it. But, you know, when you're doing it, sometimes it isn't the thing and then it becomes that later. You know, everybody like finally like discovers this stuff and then, or I don't know. Maybe people are more appreciative later in life because they're nostalgic for it. I'm not really sure what it is. But either way, it was nice and it was fun and we had a really good time and it was great. It was great getting back together with everybody and seeing, you know, everybody in the band because we hadn't really kept in that great a touch in the kind of intervening years.
Did you guys finally break up in because there's Tonight Forever comes out in 2001, and then what is this? Living Outside comes out in 2003. It says.
Yeah.
So like, when did you guys officially call it quits?
We decided, well, like Bunch and I decided, like I think even before we went on the final tour for that last record, that we were going to split up. It just, I don't know. He was having some, I don't know. He was kind of in a dark place and was kind of distracted, and it just didn't seem like it was working anymore. You know, Rodney had a tragedy with his daughter at the time, and he wasn't able to play with us anymore. And you know, it just didn't feel like the same thing anymore, and it just felt like it was John and I trying to keep it alive and keep going, and I think we were running out of energy. So we kind of made that decision before we went on this last tour we went on at the end of 2003. So after that tour, we kind of were officially split, but then we didn't get back together, but we did go to Japan like in this summer of 2004. It was like a one-off. And like our original drummer, Scott, came back and we did like a little week in Japan.
That was the end, and then like because on Wikipedia it says in that year, To End a Letter, you were in a compilation or something?
Yeah, that's what, when we went to Japan, they wanted a record to be able to promote when we came over. So we threw a bunch of like unreleased material and B-sides and demos and stuff on in a little compilation. That's what that thing is. It came out in Japan for that tour. That's what that is.
So like, sorry, go on.
As I was saying, that's Bunch went on, like he joined Further Seems Forever, did a record with them.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I got that record because I was a big Further Seems Forever fan. Actually, it's kind of funny because after they basically broke up the first time where Karaba quit, and then they got Jason on the second record, which I didn't really like that one. But then I heard John going to the third one. My initial reaction was like, oh, come on, a third singer. But I thought the record was fucking great. Like, did you listen to it at all?
Yeah, I heard. I mean, he played it for me, you know, when he had done it, and I was, you know, I gave him a lot of credit because some of their music isn't easy to sing to. It's very kind of math rocky at times, and
yeah,
I know how John thinks, and he, you know, John liked, in addition to like some of the hardcore stuff I mentioned, I mean, his favorite bands are like U2 and REM and stuff like that. He likes very melodic music, and you know, so his instinct is to write very kind of like melodic, kind of standard, you know, rock vocals over stuff, and so he had to really work with them to kind of edit the songs and kind of get it to a place where you could have choruses and things like that. And
yeah.
So I was proud of him because he did that, and I thought he did a really good job. But it's weird, you know, because you're in a band with a guy so I've been in a band with him since one way or another since like the late 80s, and it's odd to hear it's like seeing your girlfriend out with like another guy or something.
Yeah.
You suddenly like, oh, you're hearing him with somebody else. So it's just weird because now you're listening to him as like as a listener and not as a, band member or something.
Yeah.
So that was trippy.
I kind of heard like a little bit of there's a little bit of Save Yourself in like the style of some of the songs he sang to on The Forever Seems Forever. Like I can kind of hear that a little bit. I don't know. So like, okay, so you guys broke up, and then when you guys got asked to do the Revelation, when they reached out to you, did you guys all jump on board, or was there kind of was someone like, I don't know?
And it took a second, because I think like Bunch was still doing some music, like he was kind of trying to start his kind of a number of bands and still doing. Oh no, wait a minute, that actually happened afterwards.
Yeah,
because no, that's right. That's after those, because that's kind of what inspired him to kind of try to do some bands after we did that show. I think he got the bug again. Yeah, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, and then I kind of warmed up to the idea, and it was great. I mean, it was really fun to get everybody back together and do that again, and the show was pretty fun, and yeah, but I think actually, yeah, we couldn't get our bass player back. He was off in Peru living in the jungle with the
Oh wow.
with a tribe.
Really?
Yeah, literally. He became a shaman. So he was down in the jungles of Peru living with a tribe, taking ayahuasca and learning, to be like basically a healer. So he did not play that show. Yeah. And that's what he still does today. He's like a Reiki healer and a yoga instructor, and
wow.
Yeah, but he was always into that kind of stuff. But so yeah, he didn't come back for that show. We couldn't get him because he was literally out of the country. But we had our friend Ian, who is from a band called Death by Stereo, and he's in the Aquabats. And yeah, he ended up kind of being our fill-in guy for a while, like because Rodney wasn't touring with us, and he had done some tours with us and stuff, and so he played bass on that.
Was that one of the best crowds you guys had ever played to in your career?
I remember it was a good one. I don't know if it was one of the best, but
or did it like remind you of the old days when like, did you have that reaction back when you guys were touring?
At times, yes, not everywhere. Like we were one of those bands that we did well in LA and on the West Coast, and we did well in like the kind of New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, like those areas, and then there were parts of the country where it was like, it was playing to like nobody in the South and places like that. But yeah, it was a good show, and it was fun. I don't know, it just felt good. And then John went on to like kind of get the bug again, like I said, and he started doing I think he had a couple different bands after that.
So I'm gonna start wrapping this up. I know you probably get asked about John a lot, which I'm not gonna do because I'm sure that's just something I'm not gonna touch. But when you guys did the tribute to him, you got Kenny from Jesus Christ, Starting Line to sing. How did that was so surprising to me because everyone else made sense, like Popeye and Jeff and fucking the dude from Orange 9mm.
I don't know how that happened. Like the people that were putting that show together, which are like I think Joe Nelson, and they had massive connections, and they kind of put the word out, and a lot of people just started like jumping on board that wanted to be part of it, and he was a very energetic guy. I remember that.
Yeah, he was like jumped to the crowd and everything.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun. That was really cool. I mean, it was a sad occasion, but I think that John would have been pretty stoked, that many people cared, and it was actually like a really good kind of, it was like closure, kind of being able to do that and have people appreciate it, and it was nice.
Yeah, man. Yeah, the video is wild. It's on YouTube. I don't know if you ever had a chance to watch it.
No, I kind of never like to watch myself. Yeah, weird that way.
All right, man. All right, so I'll wrap this up. Before I ask the last question, what would you like to plug? It could be about you, it could be about a friend, it could be about both.
I've got nothing to plug. Yeah, honestly, I have
like a fucking Netflix series. I don't know, anything you could get a chance to give someone a shout out.
Honestly, I do not have anything to plug. I can't even think. I don't know what anybody's doing anymore. So sorry.
That's okay. All right, man. Last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
For us, it was always kind of the music came first and the rest of it came second. I still, I still look up to people like the Ian MacKays of the world, the ones that kind of just, they just maintain their ethics to the end of the day. And that was always, it was a bit of a liability at times to try to stay true to those kind of things, because it's tempting to want to stray in the other way. But at the end of the day, for us, it was always about the music, and, we just kind of did what we wanted to do, and people could have liked it or they didn't, but we tried not to compromise, at least that part. I think that's what people should do generally.